ESPN reported this week that Brock Lesnar informed Dana White that he will not be returning to the UFC, and in fact, he is retired from mixed martial arts, which means there will be no fight with Daniel Cormier, there will be no fight with anybody for Brock Lesnar, and that is a huge bargaining chip that he loses if he closes the door on his MMA career. I am not buying this at all. If any of this sounds familiar, it's because we've heard this before. 4 years ago, he chose on ESPN, he went on ESPN and made the big announcement that he was choosing WWE over UFC. This was right before WrestleMania 31, and he said that he signed a new deal with Vince McMahon. I'm an entertainer. That's what I am. I'm not a fighter anymore. I'm leaving that behind. I'm closing the door on a return to MMA, is how he phrased it at that time. So, here we go again. He has played both sides against each other brilliantly for years now to get a better deal for himself. He's got no reason to close that door for good. He was being drug tested as recently as 2 weeks ago. I don't believe for a second that he is closing the door completely on another fight. Now, he may not actually ever fight again. Maybe he has no intention of fighting. But if he thinks that he can leverage a better deal for himself by unretiring and playing the two sides against each other, believe me, he'll do it in a heartbeat. In fact, in The Observer, it said that he pitched a flat fee to Dana White, as opposed to being paid on pay-per-view points if he was to come back to UFC, because their entire pay-per-view structure has changed now with their ESPN deal. Now they're going to be making the same amount of money no matter what, even as their pay-per-view numbers have continued to drop off in recent years. It's a hell of a deal for them. Brock didn't want that. He gave them a number. He said, this is the number I want to be paid. They thought that number was too high. And he decided to retire. Until the next time he decides to retire. Also, there was a report, and I believe it was attributed to Brad Shepard, I want to say, that supposedly Brock Lesnar has told Vince McMahon that he plans to retire from WWE as well, and he wants to do so at WrestleMania 36 next year in Tampa. I am not sure that I buy that either, because why the hell would he tell Vince McMahon that so far in advance? But let's play along. Let's play along and say that it's true. Who does Brock wrestle in his final match? Well, I know a guy who's made it his mission to be the man to retire Brock Lesnar, and his name is Matt Riddle, who also happened to fight in UFC, by the way. 7 wins. Would have had more had they not overturned some of those wins due to pot failures. Brock Lesnar knows about drug test failures, although that was a very different kind of failure than the ones that knocked Riddle out of the UFC. But I think with enough time on the main roster, which of course is a huge risk in and of itself. I mean, you just look at this guy's name and Vince McMahon would probably put him in a fucking green question mark costume. But with enough time on the main roster to kind of build him up, and maybe there isn't enough time for this. I don't know. I mean, we're a year away from WrestleMania, but with enough time, I think that could be one hell of a 6-minute match. And you can make a new star, something the WWE doesn't seem to know how to do anymore. But that doesn't mean you don't try. But when Brock does decide to step away, I was thinking about this, and this would be a good question to pose to all of you. What is his legacy? What will people think of when they think about Brock Lesnar once he's gone, once he's officially retired? I think that they will think about a guy who wanted to make as much money as possible, who was a naturally gifted athlete, which he is, who did not get paid by the hour. He showed up, he did his job, and he went home. And a lot of people will hold that against him, and they shouldn't, because that is the deal he was able to negotiate for himself because he knew his worth. And he was smart. It's like the people who you can knock Hulk Hogan for a whole bunch of different things. But it's come out over the years, at least one of the contracts that he signed with WCW. It may have been the deal that he negotiated with them to kind of re-up in like 98. There were rumors he might jump ship and go back to WWE. He ended up staying with WCW, and maybe it was in a lawsuit. But a copy of the contract got leaked. And it was unbelievable. And I remember reading parts of it on the podcast at the time when it initially was kind of revealed. And it showed he was getting like 25% of like pay-per-view revenue, and all the things that he had built into this contract were just unbelievable. And people were attacking Hogan for it. And I just remember thinking, why are you attacking Hogan? Attack Bischoff. Attack WCW. They're the ones that agreed to it. Wouldn't you try to get as much as you could out of the company? All they had to say was no. But they obviously didn't want to lose him, so they gave him what he wanted. It's not Hogan's fault. That's him being smart. It's him being shrewd. You could say the same thing about Brock Lesnar. Vince McMahon doesn't have to keep signing him to these contracts. He doesn't have to agree to a part-time schedule. But he does. It's not Brock's fault. Brock's one of the smartest guys in wrestling, the fact that he's able to keep negotiating these deals. He's a Hall of Famer. We know that. But he's the kind of Hall of Famer who may or may not actually show up for his own induction. Because he doesn't seem to care about that sort of thing. He sees wrestling as a business, as a means to an end, not as the end, like so many other people do. He represents something, physically anyway, that WWE does not have a lot of these days. Those sort of imposing, larger-than-life type stars. So when he does show up, he stands out so much more. You can say, oh, Brock's lazy, he's this, he doesn't do anything, he just stands there. But you can't deny the fact that when his music hits and he comes out there and he's bouncing up and down, there's just a different feeling. He's deceptively quick for a guy his size. He can bump around as good as any big guy I've ever seen. When Brock's got those, working shoes on and he's bumping around for somebody, or he goes flying out over the top rope, for a guy as big as he is, it's pretty damn impressive. He's one of the better kind of bump takers I've seen in WWE. You wouldn't expect that for somebody like him. And when he is motivated to go out there with somebody he wants to work with, that's when we get to see the real Brock Lesnar. And it's a shame that we don't get to see more of that, more of what he's capable of, wrestling-wise. But it's like Hogan in Japan. He knows what works for him and what he doesn't need to use. Here in this country, for example, we saw a side of Hogan in Japan when you watch those Japanese matches that you never saw here in this country, because he knew the audience, he knew what he can get away with here, and what he had to do when he was over there. There was a whole side of him that a lot of people just never got to see. And you could say the same thing about Brock Lesnar. I mean, I remember him putting Chris Benoit and people on SmackDown in the stretch muffler and all these different wrestling holds. The first time around when he had his first run, he left that in the past. It's not like he forgot how to do it. He just left that behind. That was a different Brock Lesnar. And I wish we would have got to see more of that. Because I cringe when I hear people say, Brock Lesnar doesn't know how to wrestle. Brock Lesnar's not a good wrestler. All he does is suplex. Brock Lesnar won an NCAA title. You're going to say he doesn't know how to wrestle? Believe me, he is capable of a lot more than what he shows us. And it's hard to measure how much of a real box office attraction he is these days, given how a lot of the metrics are down in terms of ratings and live event attendance, but he doesn't show up on TV and he doesn't do live events. And their pay-per-view model is so different than it used to be, you can't judge his drawing power off pay-per-view buys anymore either. You can, maybe you can by network subscriptions, but how often does he wrestle there too? And frankly, network growth is not all that impressive. It's kind of flat right now. But I would say don't underestimate the appeal that he may have had and that Ronda Rousey for sure had on those Fox executives when they signed that new TV deal for SmackDown last year. So I don't know that I could sit here and say that Brock Lesnar has made the company more money than he has sucked out of it. But Lesnar will go down as one of the biggest stars they ever had. And I would say that I'll miss the guy after he's gone, but I never get to see him. So I don't know that I'll even notice.